another Ruach Sundays.
This week we're going to be looking at the story of Lazarus, and we can find it in John chapter 11, running from verse 1 through to 44. So let's have a look at it. The scriptures we're looking at this week are made up of three main parts. There's the first part where this guy Lazarus, who is in a place called Bethany, has become really sick, and then word is sent to Jesus, and Jesus interacts with that with his disciples. Then Jesus makes his way to where Lazarus is, and then the third part is when Jesus arrives there at the tomb where Lazarus is and engages with the sisters and the other Jews there and how they react and so on. So these scriptures open up where, as we said, this guy Lazarus from Bethany has become really, really sick, and his sisters Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus. And what they say is, and it says a lot about his relationship with Lazarus, and they say that Jesus, our Lord, the one who you love, is sick. So the relationship between Jesus and Lazarus must have been exceptionally close. And what's also exceptional is Jesus' response to this news. And this is what he says, and let me read it for you. It says that this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So Jesus obviously, on hearing this news and listening to the Father, realised that this is a time where God's glory will show through. About 2 days after that, after hearing the news, Jesus says to his disciples, right, let's go to Judea. Now this complexes the disciples somewhat, because in Judea they tried to stone Jesus. So they start to question Jesus a little bit and say, Jesus, are you sure you want to go back there? That's where they wanted to kill you. And this is what Jesus says, and it's brilliant. And it reminds me of a movie scene, which we're going to have a look at in a second. But this is what Jesus says. He says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. And what that means, falling asleep, means that it's a kind of a well-known term for death. So Lazarus has died. Jesus is aware of this. And Jesus is going to go back to Judea with his disciples, and they're going to wake him up.
I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you are looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have money. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you. But if you don't, I will look for you. I will find you.
So there's this movie called Taken. Liam Neeson, a great Irishman. Maybe some of you have seen it. For those teenagers that are a little bit younger, you'll have to wait till you're 15 before you can see it with your parents' permission. It's a movie where it's this child is taken from a father, and this father is Liam Neeson. And there's this brilliant scene after the child has been taken where the father is able to speak to the people who have taken her, and he leaves them a warning. And it kind of reminded me a little bit when Jesus had heard this news from the sisters, that his response was a loving fatherly response, but he was saying that this is not the end, that I'm going to come and I'm going to find this enemy, this death that has taken my friend who I love dearly, and I'm going to go and I'm going to defeat that enemy, and I'm going to take Lazarus from the clutches of death, and I'm going to rescue him.
I want to look at the part where Jesus is travelling from Jerusalem to Bethany, and everything that goes on around Martha and Mary, the two sisters. When Martha hears that Jesus is coming, she goes out to meet him, but Mary, she stays behind. There's a difference between these two sisters, and we'll see that as we go on in the story and come back to that. So the first thing that Martha does when she sees Jesus, she weeps and she says, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But she says, I know that God will give you whatever you ask for. So there's such faith there in Jesus. And Jesus answers straight away with a very clear answer. And he says, your brother will rise again. And Martha thinks this might be the last resurrection, and that in the end that all will be risen again with him. But Jesus is also promising a more immediate resurrection for Lazarus. And he says in verse 25, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live and will never die. Do you believe this? He follows it up straight away. Do you believe this? And he's not asking this only of Martha. He's asking this of us as well. Do we echo that? Do we believe that he is the life and the resurrection? And it made me think of, if you think back of the time when you gave your life to the Lord, that you have to proclaim, you have to say out loud, I believe that Jesus is the life and the resurrection, that he is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah. And there's something so strong in proclaiming that and saying that out loud. And it just struck me again that that is what the Lord is asking us, as much as he was asking Martha so many thousands of years ago. Martha runs back and she goes and gets Mary, and she says Jesus is on his way, and she comes out and they're just a little bit outside the village, and Mary comes up to Jesus and she says the same thing to Jesus in the part where she said, if you had been here, my brother would still have been alive. But she doesn't follow up with the second part of faith that she has in him. This is where the Lord's heart breaks, not only for the fact that Lazarus is dead, but for the sin and the sickness and the death in the world, the unbelief in itself. He was deeply moved, it says, in the spirit, in the core of his being, he was deeply moved. And in verse 35, this is interestingly enough the shortest verse in the Bible. It says Jesus wept. It's only 2 words, but there was so much more emotion. It was so much that happened within those 2 words that the Lord, yes, he loved Lazarus and he did grieve over him, but the tears were not just grief as everybody else was grieving for Lazarus. It was grief for this world that he loved, and that he was reaching his hand out for life, and he wanted to reach everyone and see the faith in people, that they really knew that the only way to have everlasting life was through Jesus. And it's just a very poignant story that really touched me reading it again, that the Lord loves us so much, and his heart hurts for those who haven't been saved yet, who haven't seen that reality, seen the truth in the fact that no one comes to the Father but through him.
So Jesus is weeping. This is witnessed by the Jews that are there, and they begin to ask themselves, if this is the man that can give sight to the blind, then surely he could have kept this man. And there's a beautiful duality that's happening there, where the Jews that are gathered there are witnessing Jesus as the person and as the human, and with emotions, and Jesus the God, the miracle maker. Jesus approaches the tomb where Lazarus is, and it says again he's deeply moved. What kind of scene would that have been, to see Jesus, the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the King above all kings, and he is so deeply touched and moved that it's mentioned 3 separate times in this scripture. So he approaches the tomb, and he tells them to roll the stone away. Martha then says to Jesus, he says, Jesus, by this stage there will be a strong odor of death if we roll that stone away. And Jesus says to Martha, he says, did I not tell you that if you believe that you will see the glory of God? So then they take the stone away, and Jesus is standing there, and can you imagine the smells that were pouring out, and Jesus was standing there in front of the tomb looking into the darkness, and he has this conversation with the Father, and this is what he says. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me. So Jesus also displaying the power and the glory of God, so that those who do not believe would have another opportunity to believe. And really what Jesus is doing here as well is it's a taste of things to come. It's a taste of the resurrection power that will take place with Lazarus, but also with Jesus on Calvary, and also within us, for those who believe that we have that same resurrection power available to us, that Jesus is the life, but he is the resurrection, and that resurrection power, that resurrection that can take us from the grips of death and take us out of a life that is leading nowhere to a life that has a future, a life that has that is full and that is eternal and that is with Jesus. He says, Lazarus, come out. So Jesus proclaiming into this darkness, into this tomb, and where all this odor of death is coming out, and he says, Lazarus, come out. And then the dead man comes forward, and he comes forward in this kind of creepy manner, like something out of a mummy movie, where the linen, the death clothes and the death wraps and the herbs and everything that they put on to preserve the body when they wrap it for death, that the linen is still on Lazarus' face, it's still wrapped around his feet, and he comes forward awakened. And a miracle has taken place, and God's glory is there, and resurrection has occurred. Jesus then says to them, take off his death clothes and let him go. And when I read this, I felt, wow, that's just as relevant today as it was then. And I sometimes feel that Jesus is saying to his church to take off your death clothes and go and live in robes of righteousness. And for those who have and who have accepted Jesus into their life and who live for him, sometimes we can still drape ourselves in death clothes. We can still fall into the patterns of a life that is gone and that is left behind us, and we've been saved from and resurrected from. And that challenge for our church is to live and to identify as righteous, to be robed in clothes of righteousness, and to take off our death clothes, to take off our linen that identifies us as unsaved. And that's the challenge for this morning. I really want to challenge those who are listening to take off your death clothes, to drape yourselves in robes of righteousness available through Jesus, who is the life and the resurrection, and to go and to live and to be an example of God's life to those all around you.